Love this notebook that I got from, if you have near you, what is it called? Top Drawer. This is a really beautiful notebook for just $20. Most things in there is quite expensive, but this one was quite affordable. At some point, I definitely will be buying one of their pencil and pens because they have so many options and such great quality, and just the ballpoint pens run so smoothly. We're vlogging today. This notebook, I write all sorts of things that I learn right now at my current job. Long story, but in my current role right now, which is temporary, I'm literally a receptionist and there's so much free time. To be really honest, I just watch YouTube videos. And on YouTube, I've been watching a lot of Vietnamese content, interviews all in Vietnamese, or variety shows, all sorts of things. And as I watch, I try to watch without subtitles the first time around, and then the second time I watch it with auto caption or whatever. And then I write down words that I learn. See, don't know how this is turning out on my camera, but learned so many words. Anyways, I think there was something I wanted to talk about today. Oh wait, I also doodle. If y'all want to see my doodling, if you can see it. Yes, I used to draw a lot as a kid in my teens, and so I stopped for many years, and so just trying to work that muscle again, practicing drawing. I did this. I actually don't want to show you this one little sketch that I did because I might save that for a little surprise in the future. So what did I want to talk about today? So today I wanted to talk about a very common, I think, feeling or fear that a lot of people run into as heritage learners, so Vietnamese Americans who are learning again Vietnamese from whatever level. And one of the comments I see a lot on my TikTok page is around the idea that our families, especially if you are Southern Vietnamese, will judge you for using words that they don't really use in their everyday language, in their everyday conversation, and they might call it formal. So comments that I see on my TikTok are often like, oh, I used this word with my family and they said it was too formal. There's something there. I want to first recognize the fact that, first off, yes, there might be words that feel very formal and probably too formal maybe in everyday conversation with friends and family. And to this day, even for myself, I'm still sometimes trying to distinguish which is too formal in speaking and then which is better for writing. Because in Vietnamese, that's very much the case. That we have words that we use in writing and then we have words that we use in conversation. And I think that's actually quite normal in a lot of Asian languages. Certain words are reserved for writing that feel more, I guess, academic or professional, or it's just strictly used for writing, really. So anyways, I wanted to talk about this comment and how I have been feeling about it and learning, and how that has influenced my learning as well. For starters, I am Southern Vietnamese by heritage. My family, we are from the Mekong Delta. We're from Minh Tây. We're from Hà Tĩnh. And for sure, I come from a background where my grandparents did not get a full education. And therefore, my parents and their generation, my aunt and uncles, were not really encouraged to pursue much in school. So outside of just having a high school diploma, that is all they have. And I know that there are other fellow Vietnamese Americans out there who might have a similar background as to that, and you might also have family members who may not even have finished high school in Vietnam. And this definitely is a very common occurrence, I think, with Vietnamese Americans or Việt Kiều within the diaspora post-war. Lots of families in Vietnam who came from very poor backgrounds, who a lot of young kids and teenagers had to work instead of going to school. That was the reality of being in Vietnam pre-war. And to be fair, also post-war for a long time. And to this day, there are communities probably that it's still the case in Vietnam. With that being said, the language that we grow up learning in America with our parents feels very short and very informal, sentences not fully developed or fully complete, but that's just the way that we've spoken, and that is the way that our parents speak to each other from that generation. So of course, it's totally normal. It's fine. Everything is fine. However, as I'm learning Vietnamese for the past few years now, there's a few things that I definitely am recognizing. That first off, let me just explain my journey. I don't know how to explain this, but let me just start with my journey. So when I started out, I had the same exact fear. What if I learned words that was way too formal? What if I learned words that my parents or my family thinks that's a little too, I don't know what the right word is, elitist or whatever. And what if I also used words that were more like Northern Vietnamese? Because that's also an issue too, right? Not that there's anything wrong with using words that are from a different region, but it just feels awkward and strange to use those words in our family setting if that's just not what they're used to saying. Literally going into a conversation, speaking with like an English American conversation and then speaking with a British accent. It's just awkward. It's weird, right? You just don't do that. So anyways, those are the key things that I ran into when I first started out learning Vietnamese. And I really had to distinguish whether if it was with my tutor or with my own research, what is more reserved for written and then what is more so I can use in everyday conversation. It's totally fine. And I've gotten to a point where I feel like I have a system in which I can figure it out and I can ask the right people. I have enough community to ask someone who's fluent in Vietnamese, whether or not that is something that I can say in everyday conversation, especially as a Southern Vietnamese speaker. But what I want to point out, though, to all my fellow Vietnamese Americans who are learning Vietnamese and have a similar fear as this, to be learning words that are too formal, quote unquote, is that let's keep in mind that since the war, so post-war, Vietnamese as a language has grown and developed. It has had the beauty and benefits of no war, and for the past 50 years, in which the culture and the language can evolve. And that's very normal in any language. Over time, language evolves. And that definitely has happened in Vietnam in the past 50 years. As some of you who have been learning Vietnamese for a while now, you might know that there are words that in Vietnam, they just don't say anymore. But our parents, as Vietnamese American, who have been away from Vietnam, mainland Vietnam for 50 years now, are still using old language, old words that they just don't use in everyday Vietnam anymore. And that's just something that I think as a Vietnamese heritage learner to keep in mind. When you are learning, especially if you're learning from a tutor or a teacher currently in Vietnam, no matter their age, oftentimes your tutors will be around our age now, what they're teaching you is what they're speaking today in everyday conversation, right? And that is something to keep in mind. With that being said, you might actually have family members who are tilting their head a bit and what are you saying? I haven't heard that word in forever. Or they know the word, but no one uses it, right? And that might make you feel awkward. But needless to say, from my point of view and my perspective and my experience, once you've identified words that are more formal, too formal, versus actually it's an everyday word. And in fact, everyone uses it in everyday conversation. And it's just a new word, not a new word, I really don't know how to describe it, but it's basically like, because our Vietnamese families, Vietnamese was somewhat limited to a style that was, I don't know, without saying uneducated, but it's like we just don't express that much, right? We don't need to use other words to complicate or to, not complicate, but to, what am I trying to say? To create complexity in the ways in which we're saying things. We don't have to do that. We haven't had to do that, or they haven't had to do that, right? But nowadays, as globalization has occurred and you want to be able to fully express yourself in English to be able to fully express yourself in Vietnamese as you do in English, right? Then naturally, you're going to have a wider level of vocabulary. You're going to want to have a wider range of ways to structure your sentences to be able to fully express your personality in your speech. So with that, you're going to learn words to develop your Vietnamese expressions, your way of expression, beyond than just what your family is used to speaking. Let's just simplify it. For example, in Vietnamese American families today, it might not be very common to speak about emotions. I certainly can say that about my family. And to talk about the complexity about emotions and how you're feeling. Well, being that, there are words that are just omitted in general because we just don't talk about it. But if you are wanting to use Vietnamese as a way to express yourself as you do in English, then you're going to naturally learn new words that your family may not use. And so just keep that in mind when you're using a word with your family, and they might say, "Oh, that sounds really formal," right? And there might be a simpler way to say it, a little bit more, I don't know, direct or simplified. And that doesn't mean that it technically is formal, quote unquote. It's just probably something that they haven't heard in everyday conversation. And so you just have to accept the fact that they might make that comment, but it may not be exactly true. There are words that I've gotten that feedback from my family, small comments, how it is, and they'll be like, "Oh, that sounds a little formal," or "That's kind of a weird word to use." But then when I use it with my tutor or with my Vietnamese friends around my age who grew up in Vietnam, they don't blink an eye. They're like, they understand it's a word, it's conversation, and there's nothing more to it. And I think one other thing that I want to bring up is actually the idea that your Vietnamese is to be limited to only what is casually understood, words that are casually used and are still used by your family. This is a bit of a bigger idea, but if you are Vietnamese American and you are learning today spoken modern Vietnamese, I think it's a good thing that you actually do use words that you're learning that are being used in everyday conversations, but that maybe your family is not used to. I wouldn't be shy to use those words. And the reason why is because as someone who is learning Vietnamese, I am now the first, I don't know, I get to learn Vietnamese in a way that maybe our parents didn't get to, or our grandparents didn't get to because they were uneducated, because they came from backgrounds that where they had lack of access to education. So in some ways, I get to take my Vietnamese heritage and culture within my family to linguistically to another level. So learn Vietnamese as they do in Vietnam. Learn these words and use these words because you're only just furthering your family's Vietnamese growth, right? Educational growth or intellectual growth. And that's how we should be teaching our kids. One day, if I have kids and if you all have kids, I think it's important to teach them these new ways of expressing ourselves, or not new ways, but more so new ways, but and more so a more fuller language skill to be able to express themselves fully in Vietnamese. So, anyways, that's my little spiel. And I think that if you liked this, then you should absolutely comment, subscribe, and until next time, we'll have another conversation about the Vietnamese language.